I'm so thrilled to be here, and it's always wonderful to have a longer ACERT day. So happy to do this. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and make sure that this is still working here. Okay, you should be seeing this on your end. As Julie mentioned, my name is Jillian Baez. I am thrilled to be a senior fellow at ACERT. I'm also an associate professor over in the Department of Africana, Puerto Rican, and Latino Studies. Some of you may know the department just via our acronym AFPRL. I also am affiliated with the CUNY Graduate Center. I'm on the doctoral faculty there in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. So today I'm going to speak first on experiential learning, and then we'll be joined by my colleagues over at the Centro, at the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. For those of you who are not familiar with the Centro is a prestigious research center that we are very lucky is housed at Hunter College. And so I'm thrilled to have three of my colleagues join us here today to talk about the outreach work that they do and the ways in which they engage in experiential learning in a number of different ways. We were also we had scheduled also for a student to join us, but unfortunately the student got sick, and so they will not be joining us today. So it's unfortunate that we won't have the student perspective, but it does mean that all of us have a little bit more time to share, and certainly we will have more time for discussion and question and answer at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in to get us started about experiential learning. And really, experiential learning is a big catch-all term that can mean a number of different kinds of student experiences. And really, in terms of how I'm viewing this, I am looking at any opportunities for students to do learning by doing. So this can mean a number of different things, and I will talk about that specifically today in terms of the fieldwork experience. But let's jump in and think about this a little bit more. So I have a few forms of experiential learning that I think that most of us are familiar with as faculty and staff here at Hunter College. One of those that I think is one of the first forms of experiential learning that we think of are internships, right? And this is where we have students go into an actual work environment that usually has something to do with their major. And they complete a certain amount of hours, right, at that site. There may be supervision both at the site and also from a faculty member at the college, and they receive course credit for that. And that is something that we've seen increase, right, like over the decades, because not only just because of student interest, but really students are interested because employers look for that particular kind of internship experience to demonstrate that they do have some employability, they have some experience. Oftentimes students get other jobs later on, full-time jobs, sometimes other part-time jobs outside of, in addition to that internship experience afterward. The other kinds of learning that we often hear about in higher education is service learning, right? And this can take a number of different forms. Sometimes there are some campuses that even have like a unit or a center that just focuses on service learning, that works with students and faculty to place students in sometimes very formal settings within a community organization on a particular kind of project, or sometimes more informal, smaller projects that they'll do as a group throughout the semester or the academic year. And really what defines service learning is bridging that relationship between the students and the community, right? And building the relationship, of course, with the university, the college, and the community. Another form of experiential learning, which we won't be talking about extensively, but we do have a seminar coming up later this semester. I know Julie's like, yes, please plug it. That focuses on study abroad, but that is a major form of experiential learning that many of us are familiar with. And their students, if they're privileged enough to do it, right, it can be a wonderful immersive experience linguistically, culturally, and as you should know, at Hunter College and across CUNY, right, we have a number of different study abroad programs. And I am imagining we will have even more because of the pandemic. Many of them slowed down or shut down and are just restarting again. But that's another area. For many of us, as you know, for my fellow faculty, For many of us, what we have engaged with students directly has been research, right? So we've had many of us have mentored students that have worked with us, right, on particular research projects. For my colleagues who work in labs, some of them you have them actually working in lab, collecting data, and sometimes even analyzing data with you, or working right with qualitative or quantitative software to analyze data. All of those are also experiential experiences. At CUNY, we have there are many opportunities, right, for us to work with students like that and funding opportunities. So I think that's the one that most of us are probably the most familiar with. And then last but not least, and this is what I want to focus on today because this is the work that I've been doing for the past few years in my department, is thinking about the fieldwork experience, which in some ways there's some overlaps with the internship, um, but it can also be distinct. And the idea there is we send our students to the field. And let's talk a little bit about what that could mean. So field work is used in a variety of fields and disciplines. And depending on the discipline, they define it differently. And it may have different purposes. So for example, I'm thinking about, for those of us who are ethnographers like myself, and particularly for those of us trained in cultural anthropology, which I'm not trained in, but I know my cultural anthropologists think about field work in very specific ways. The idea there, right, is that you go somewhere and you spend extensive time, right, with that particular people or community. And for students, that could be a summer opportunity, a month, 2 months. For more advanced researchers, right, it's usually 6 months to a year, with the idea that you're immersed within that space. That could include observing and or participating, right, depending on the field, right? Um, in other contexts, that might be something like, for example, in the field of education, that might be sending students into the classroom, right? And that will be their field work experience. And sometimes they're in observation mode, or sometimes they might be assisting a teacher. The same could be said, psychology also tends to employ field work. And certainly my colleagues in the natural sciences also do field work, right? They will literally go into the natural world, right, to observe whatever kind of natural environment they're looking at for an extended period of time. And so those are, but the idea here is that we want to send students into a real world context where they have an extensive and or intensive experience, depending on how the fieldwork program is designed. So I want to talk a little bit about what fieldwork has looked in the context of my department. So for the last 3 years, on and off, I have coordinated our fieldwork program. I will say prior to this, before I got to Hunter, I was at the College of Staten Island for a number of years, another CUNY campus in a different department. And I coordinated internship there. So I've had both experiences, and there are some overlaps and there are some differences that I'll be sort of highlighting as I go through. But in the context of my current department, fieldwork has a very strong connection to the mission of the department and its history. So, for those of you who are not so familiar with my particular department, Africana, Puerto Rican, and Latino Studies was established in 1969. At that time, it was the Department of Black and Puerto Rican Studies, and stayed and had that actually had that name for decades. Over the years, we've tweaked it to accommodate both changes in the fields, right? So we moved from Black to Africana studies, for example, to be more pan-continental and diasporic. And in the case of adding the Latino studies, where it didn't exist before, that's to acknowledge the change in the population in New York City. It's no longer just a Puerto Rican population, but we have a growing Mexican population, Dominican population for sure, Central American, Ecuadorian, Colombian, Peruvians, and so on. So, but historically, it should be noted, right, that the department comes, out of the context of the civil rights movement, and specifically results from student demands. And I want to say also too that Hunter is not the only campus in which this has happened. City College has a similar history, as does Brooklyn College. And then there are other places across the country. I'm thinking of San Francisco State University, for example, who their programs in ethnic studies also began around the same time and we each informed the way in which we constructed our programs, which are much more community-based than other departments. So these student demands, some of them I think are obvious, and then some of them are, I thought, are quite interesting. One of them, of course, which I'm sure all of you are imagining, right? The main student demand was for a more inclusive, right, curriculum, right, that represented this changing student body, specifically the African American students, West Indian students, and Puerto Rican students, and wanting to see that wanted to see courses available in the curriculum that cover those experiences. And of course, with that, of course, they were demanding for faculty, right, who were trained in those areas to be able to teach these courses, library resources. But for us, I think what's most interesting is that one of the central demands that these students were making were for existing fieldwork courses. At the time, there were fieldwork courses in the sociology department. And my understanding is, though, that the way in which those were designed were not necessarily to work with the most marginalized populations in New York City. Um, and they were thinking about this not only in terms of race and ethnicity, right, given the Black and Puerto Rican studies emphasis, but also thinking about it in terms of socioeconomic class. And so there was a demand for this particular field course to be created to specifically think about how to work with those communities and for it to be local, right? To be very tied to whatever's happening in the 5 boroughs. So what ended up happening here is they built a model of field work as service learning. Now I will say, you know, my colleagues always joke that they were pioneers of service learning before service learning, right, was in circulation. And so they were thinking about this, right, prior to, there's so much writing on service learning, for example, right now, and so many different models you could work off of. But I want to emphasize this as one way to think about it, right, that has its roots in the civil rights movement. And so their goals were twofold and still remain twofold, actually, are to meld theory and praxis, right? And so trying to make that connection between what's happening in the classroom and outside. So one is one of the goals was and remains strengthening the departments and also the colleges at large, connection to the larger New York City community. And secondly, to prepare students to apply their coursework to a real world context. We do require that students take a lot of historical courses, a lot of theory-based courses. They do take some research methods courses with us at the more advanced level. But this is really their only opportunity to formally sort of step out of the classroom and make those connections. And so, and you know, part of that, just to give you a sense of how we have designed field work, is the students, they look for a site the semester before. Sometimes we are able to assist them and set them up with an organization that we have a relationship with already, that maybe perhaps our other students have worked at. Sometimes they find the site on their own. Once that is set up, they are required to submit a letter from that place that states that they have someone who is supervising them and gives us the name of that person, because that person will write a letter for them at the end discussing their performance while they were there. The students are required to do 90 hours of field work that semester. They keep a log, right, of all of their hours, days, times, and what tasks they completed. We also have them keep a more informal journal with the idea that that will prepare them to write a paper at the end. They write a 10-page reflection paper. I will be honest with you, they do need a lot of guidance on that because it's not a genre that most of the students are familiar with, right? We train them to write research papers, and this is a little different and forces them to make connections in new kinds of ways. But I have found that it makes the students much more thoughtful, and I feel like much more prepared. And I should say they usually do this in their senior year, much more prepared to make that transition from Hunter into wherever else, whether that's the working world or with graduate school. It helps them to make that transition. So it gives you a little bit of a sense. Now, that said, we have been, like many folks across the college, trying to re-envision how we think about field work, because our model has not changed that much since 1969, but the world has changed, as you might imagine. So we have been thinking about re-envisioning fieldwork in a few ways. One of those is, in alignment with the college at large, we have been thinking a lot about career readiness, right? So we've been in conversations, for example, with career services, to talk a little bit about, should it be called field work? Should it be called an internship? It's not quite either right now. It sort of has this hybrid feel to it as it sits currently in the present. And so thinking about that, especially in the sense of how we can make this legible for employers, because as faculty, we think about with the experience of it and the thinking about it. And that's important, and I certainly am invested in that. But then there's the other side too, where the students have to figure out, like, oh, okay, I have to write a resume. What am I going to do with this? So we're thinking about that. As a matter of fact, Career Services is hosting a resume building workshop with our students very soon in early March. So we're really excited about that. And I'm hoping also too that will give us a way of thinking about how we might want to rename or rewrite the description for the fieldwork experience. But that is a big question. And the students, I have to say, in my experience, all of them gain all sorts of experience and skills in these positions, and I see them grow tremendously. It's a matter of being able to name that, right, in a resume, in a cover letter, in an interview, in a way that translates well to an employer. So those are that's certainly something that we're thinking about. We're also engaged in this larger debate about the ethics of paid and unpaid internships. Historically, we've always asked the students to take on unpaid positions because this has been so service-based in terms of our philosophy. But we also recognize that our student population is they're commuters. Many of them are first generation students. Many of them we know are lower income, and they already have part-time jobs and a number of other kinds of responsibilities. So we're having a lot of debates about whether whether we should be okay with paid internships or not. And some departments are actually at Hunter, I have learned. So I think there is a case to be made there, but that is a debate, and that's a nationwide debate that's happening too, right, about internships. So that's one of the issues that we're considering at this point. We're also trying to think about deepening our relationships as a department with community-based and governmental organizations. There are a number of organizations we've had relationships with over the years, but things have changed, right? And so there are so many more organizations, for example. Also, we've had a number of students just do remote only work. And that's like a very different kind of relationship. And we're still figuring out how to navigate that. But ultimately for us, the goal here, right, is to figure out how to maintain a commitment to service, whereby the experience is beneficial for both the student and the community. And that's always the balance with this kind of work. It is relational, and we want to make sure the student is getting as much as they can out of it, but we also want to make sure that we are fulfilling whatever community needs are out there. And we've had to adjust to this. I have to be honest, like, we still ran field work during the pandemic, during COVID. We adjusted as needed. The students became hybrid. And then went back to being online, and then went hybrid again, and adjusted also to whatever those community needs were, because those shifted, right? So whatever they thought they were coming into at the beginning of the semester, for example, in spring 2020, was not what it was by March, April, May. So we've had to adjust with that as well, and have learned quite a bit from that and remain flexible in that regard. Okay, so I will stop here. And certainly we can talk about this more during the discussion period. But I'm going to go ahead and have Rosa Cruz, Cristel Jusino Diaz, and Aníbal Arocho also weigh in with the work that the Centro is doing. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name again is Rosa Cruz-Cordero, and I am the partnership manager at Centro. With me are Aníbal Arocho, our library manager, and Cristel Jusino, Centro's director of public humanities. As you heard, The Center for Puerto Rican Studies is the largest university-based research institute, library, and archive dedicated to telling the Puerto Rican story, to sharing our Puerto Rican experience in the United States. This year, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. We're very excited about that. Today, we're sharing with you library and data resources that have been used in developing Connecticut's first public school Black and Latino studies curriculum, Ohio's first Puerto Rican studies college course, New York City's project-based learning curriculum, and programming throughout the New York City public library system. As Aníbal and Cristel present, I will be adding links to the chat for all of our resources that they will be discussing. I now turn it over to Aníbal.
All righty. So thank you everyone for giving us the space and the time to share with you today. I'm going to give a brief overview of the Centro Library and Archive and how it might be able to fit into the types of coursework that you're offering and the experiences you want your students to have. Centro was founded not too long after the Black and Puerto Rican Studies program. So we are also a product of the civil rights movement. The foundational papers of Centro go back to 1969. So it was a process getting that approval and getting that funding to get the center off the ground. As part of it, a library and an archive was always a core part of what they wanted to do with the Center for Puerto Rican Studies. And an archive came later as a result of various projects, oral histories, and collections that people would donate to us before we kind of really knew what to do with them. We're integrated within the Hunter College Library. So our collection of over 20,000 books that are housed in the stacks behind me can be searched in the Hunter College Library catalog. Something that is unique to us is that we have an expansive collection of microfilm newspapers from Puerto Rico that you will not find anywhere else. Outside of traveling to the island or going to the National Archive or to going to the Library of Congress. And these include newspapers that cover the colonial period of Puerto Rico in addition to the 20th century. We also have an extensive collection of films, documentaries, shorts, television programs, all relating to Puerto Rico or Puerto Ricans that we lend to teachers to project in their classes. In addition to that, we go a little further than other libraries and we actually collect dissertations. There's so much great research that's conducted that never really makes it into a textbook. But nonetheless, this research and the resources that are used towards this research are very integral to our further understanding of the Puerto Rican studies. So we do collect those as well. The archives was founded in 1989 as the result of a couple of foundational collections, the Jesus Colon papers and the Justo Martí photography collection. It's grown to over 300 collections. My colleague Rosa will be putting into the chat the resources that you can use to access our archival database. This would allow you to search by keyword for topics that might be relevant to any coursework that you're doing if you'd like to use primary source documents in your classroom. Our papers are divided into the personal papers of individuals, such as Pedro Pietri, Pura Belpre, and the organizational records of organizations such as the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, Aspira, United Bronx Parents, and Chara. So we have large and small and grassroots and community organizations all represented. We also have an extensive oral history program that is comprises various phases. And that is available also in one of the links. You can listen to our oral histories in our digital collections. So in addition to viewing samples of archival material in our digital collections, you can listen to entire oral histories. And our digital collections page is here. We cannot and probably will not digitize everything we have in the archive, but we have a representative sample. And you're encouraged to create an account, and then you can use images in your classes. You can make slideshows using the materials that are located in the digital collections. We also provide information about the individual object in the individual digital record. So there's all sorts of metadata that goes along with it, including how to actually cite these materials, which is useful for students. And we do offer hands-on work with primary sources. And following the Association of College and Research Libraries guidelines for primary source literacy, we will work with you to develop hands-on workshops focused on key competencies, including finding and identifying information through primary sources, critically evaluating the perspective of creators of primary sources, situating primary sources in context, demonstrating historical empathy and curiosity about the past. And more than anything, we want to impart the use of primary sources in a manner that respects privacy rights and cultural contexts. And this is to say that we really are willing to work with you, even if your course is not related to Puerto Ricans at all. If what you want to teach are skills based upon working with primary source documents, you can use our collection to help in that skill building as well. And it really is a unique experience when you get to see students sit there and actually go through the evidence of history having occurred. And it's really great when you see that light bulb go off between like how do these textbooks get produced, right? Like where does the history that these scholars are producing, where does it actually come from? And when they get to look through the papers of people like Pura Belpré and organizations like Charas, right, that were foundational to New York City activism, it really can be enriching for professors, for teachers, and it's always enriching for us, the staff. So thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cristel Jusino. I'm Centro's Director of Research Programs and Public Humanities. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what Centro's Research Unit and Data Hub does. So we're, as Jillian mentioned earlier, we are at its root a research institute, right? And we're dedicated to the study and creation of knowledge about the Puerto Rican experience in the United States. And we have different approaches to creating and disseminating this knowledge. Today, I'm going to talk to you about 3 of them because I think these are probably the easiest to incorporate into your classroom or to design activities for students around. The first one is Centro's Data Hub. Centro's Data Hub is a group of researchers focused on preparing reports, dashboards, tools, among others, that use open data. For example, we work a lot with US Census data to paint a picture of what's the status of Puerto Ricans in the United States and in Puerto Rico, right? So we have, for example, a dashboard where you can get data on how many Puerto Ricans live in one area, right? The demographics of those communities, what issues affect them, right? And these are more developed in our reports. We've done recent reports on pervasive poverty in Puerto Rico, on a child vulnerability index, focusing on things that affect children growing up in Puerto Rico and how vulnerable they're considered by certain government agencies. And one really great thing that the Data Hub does is that they fulfill data requests. Rosa has put the link in the chat. If you or your students have any questions about data related to Puerto Ricans, and not just Puerto Ricans, to Hispanics in the United States, you can fill out a data request form and our Data Hub will provide this data for you. One big data request that we fulfilled recently, for example, was that the TV show Tiempo on ABC7 was celebrating its 40 years on the air. So they wanted data on Puerto Ricans and Hispanics in New York City throughout the 40 years that the program has been on air, and the Data Hub provided that data and prepared a presentation for them, right? So that's just one example of things you could do with a data request. So if your students, for example, are interested in the makeup of Puerto Ricans in the United States, in a certain state, in a certain community, they could submit a data request and we could fulfill that for them. The research unit also houses the publications unit. Centro publishes the Centro Journal, which is the most important journal on Puerto Rican studies in the United States. It's been published for over 25 years. It's peer-reviewed. We put out 3 issues per year, spring, summer, and fall. These are all you can find links to them in our Centro store. And just recently, we released a project I'm really excited about, and I hope that we'll have more of these soon. So in 2025, we'll be publishing an issue on Afrodescendencia and memory in Puerto Rico. And working with the journal editors as they prepare their call for papers, they mentioned that they had been really inspired by some old articles published by Centro that aren't as easily accessible now because some of them were published in the late 90s, in the early 2000s. So with their help, we put together the Afrocentro Reader, Revisiting Black Puerto Rican Scholarship. And it's a collection of articles on the theme of Afrodescendencia that have been published in Centro. In the Centro Journal, again, going back to the 90s, right? And it's free. It's on our website. It's available to anybody who wants to download it. And it's a really great way for folks to engage with our publications. We also have Centro Press. We publish books. We've got some really great books on, I think one of my favorites is on the 50 years of Puerto Rican studies at CUNY, which again, I think is really important and relevant for people teaching courses about the history of ethnic studies who really want to get a sense of what the history of Puerto Ricans in New York City and in education, right? So that's a really great one. We have Diasporican Journeys, which collects interviews with writers from the Puerto Rican diaspora. And we'll have some really interesting books coming out in the next year. I'm really excited about when we announce those. And then finally, we have Puerto Rican Voices, which is our Emmy-winning documentary series. We won 2 Emmys so far for season 5. All of these are half-hour episodes. Season 5 focuses on issues affecting the Puerto Rican archipelago. So for example, the energy crisis. There is a really fantastic episode on the Act 60, Act 2022, which is basically the laws that have made Puerto Rico a tax haven for rich Americans and what that means for displacement of local communities, among other topics. These are all on YouTube. They are free, they're super accessible, and we've also created study guides that accompany each episode. The links for these are also in the chat, and they're really great for incorporating them into any of your curriculums. And that is all I have to say about the research unit. I know Rosa has dropped some links in the chat, but if any of you have any questions about any of these resources, I'm happy to answer them.
So we are presenting just a few of the resources that we have available to you. I invite you to visit us. We have the library and archives over at the Silverman Building at 119 and 3rd, but our offices, we're located in the West Building, in the East Building. 1407 is my office. You can come, walk by, stop by and see us. If you have any questions, our staff is readily available to meet you and help you with whatever you may need.
And the library over at Silverman, we're open to the public 10 to 5, Monday through Friday. So please feel free to come through. If you would like to make an appointment, there's a form that you can make a specific appointment and we can set aside material for you. And we say that's effective if you know exactly what you're looking for and you want to come in and see those boxes waiting for you, that pile of books waiting for you when you come in.
Any questions?
Thank you so much, Rosa, Cristel, and Aníbal. It's wonderful to have you. And I just feel like the Centro is so dynamic. You're always doing so many new things. And I do want to say too, I have found too, the Centro staff is always open to ideas, right? So we can always reach out to all of you
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
see, how we can collaborate, how it makes the most sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry.